The late President Nelson Mandela's former personal assistant, Zelda tweeted on Saturday, and I quote, "It is very clear from President Jacob Zuma that whites are not wanted or needed in South Africa," close quote. Hlengiwe was lambasted on social media and apologized later on Saturday. In the wake of the Hlengiwe storm, we ask whether South African race relations are getting worse, whether the reconciliation process was flawed, and what we need to do next. My guests are Deputy Minister of Telecommunications, Professor Hlengiwe Mkhize, activist Gillian, and Head of Media and Public Affairs at the South African Institute of Race Relations, Mienke Steytler. Guys, welcome to the show. It's been an eventful few days in South Africa and quite an interesting weekend. But can I ask you, Professor Mkhize, let me start with you.
Oh my God.
Is the reconciliation project in South Africa, has it failed, given the comments at the weekend, given all the other incidents that we've seen, the attacks and reportage around race issues in Cape Town and elsewhere in South Africa?
Not really. I think what we did during the transitional phase was very, very important to look at where we come from through the truth and reconciliation process. The only thing which I think it's important is to say we should realize that legacy-related challenges are not once-off. It's something which you have to consistently deal with over a long period of time. So we have a legacy of the past, and we have a responsibility to use our constitution and the values enshrined in it to continue on this important path that
Gillian,
was...
You're nodding as if in agreement. Do you agree that actually, what are you agreeing with? Have we moved backwards or have we moved forward? Are we a better place or not?
Well, I think whiteness has really stayed regressive in this country. It's become regressive almost. I think
what do you mean
that
by whiteness?
I mean that the whole sort of discourse of the structure called whiteness, the construct, the social construct.
Mm-hmm. And how does it manifest itself?
It manifests itself in the fact that we have endless racial incidents erupting on our landscape. Just the last few months, there have been endless attacks on black people by white people who feel justified that they own their particular piece of land, that they own South Africa. And in fact, one gets a sense, in a way, that black South Africans are being made to feel like foreigners in their own land with these kind of attitudes.
But many people, and I'll quote, say an organization like AfriForum turns around and says, oh, actually between 2010 and 2014, 2,200 white people were killed on farms all over South Africa, and there isn't the kind of storm that's shown by attacks on black people.
Well, I don't, their statistics have been, I don't really know their statistics. We know that crime is a big issue in this country. And in fact, a lot of white attitudes are because of the crime factor. But, again, it takes place in a vacuum. What about the poverty factor? We know that social ills arise out of poverty. So, there's just there's a lack of conversation. There really is a lack of conversation between the races in this country.
I'll come back to that issue. Mienke, do you, from the South African Institute of Race Relations, when you look back over the past 20 years, have we failed? Can you go back to that question and ask me, has the reconciliation project, if you will, the Rainbow Nation, failed?
We don't think it's failed. We think there's definitely still a lot of work to do. So when we look at the incidence of racial attacks, like Gillian was mentioning, they've definitely increased also over the last 2 years, over the last year even. But what we think is that it's really about underlying issues, and that due to the history of our country, things are seen as racial or racist, but that what's really underlying it is an overall frustration, with the lack of work, with an education system that's failing and so forth. And that if those underlying root causes could be sorted out, the economic inequality, that's really our main underpinning that we find in our research. And crime as well. I mean, crime has been on the up in the last couple of years, and our economy is very weak. And just to take back to what you were saying about AfriForum as well, our data, we looked at crime attacks, or farm attacks, I mean, and yes, it's a shame that the police don't categorize them as separate category anymore, but we still believe that it's due to the rural nature of the farms, it's due to a lack of policing in those areas because it's rural, and that they're easy targets, and that it's not, people going for those people because they are white. It's more because of an impunity of a high. We live in a country with a very high crime rate anyway.
So, I mean, Gillian, let me ask you, Zelda Hlengiwe's tweets were about governance in some respects, and Mienke tells me that actually the underlying issue. So is governance being used as a coating for racism in South Africa? Because a large part of it, if you were to take away some of it and say, oh, crime is terrible and so forth, but does that become code for racist attacks or to imply that a black government is incompetent?
I think that's largely a phenomenon in this country. You know, there's a black sort of face plastered on anything that goes wrong in this country, and the easiest target is government. But you know, take away the ANC factor, which I did, in fact, when I came across those tweets from Zelda, and literally she's talking about blackness, and she's talking down to blackness, and it's a whiteist narrative. She elevates whiteness. She elevates Jan van Riebeeck, which is a huge slap in the face for black South Africans, as you saw the response that happened on Twitter, the Twitter war that happened thereafter. Trivializing colonialism, trivializing poverty, talking pro-business the whole way through. I mean, if you unpack that on a discourse level, there's so much more happening there than just attacking Zuma. I mean, she's saying a whole lot of stuff, that whites are not welcome in this country, that business is paramount. No sort of understanding of the gear process and how many millions of people lost their job through that process. It's total disconnect.
Professor Mkhize, this is your government, the government on which you serve, that is being attacked in this way. Did you feel that it was racial? And how do we get out of that? Out of where we've got to where virtually every debate seems to move towards issues of race?
Well, if you look at the African National Congress, really, in terms of its history, it's based on the principle of non-racialism. So for me, it's like people are appealing for leadership in terms of saying, you provide leadership on this issue as well. But also, Justice, we have to be very careful as South Africans. Often this debate is triggered off by extremism of some kind, or people who are anxious about something, who feel maybe they don't belong, or they are uncertain, they don't know what to do. And that's not the way we should be dealing with it. We ought to, on a regular basis, deal with legacy-related issues, which my colleagues here have spoken about. If you look at the structural issues of our economy, it's in our faces, but we don't talk about it. When the schools are opening, we are all saying back to school. We're not looking at the child who is located at Sandton as against the child who's at Alex and Diepsloot, 5 minutes away from each other. And we're not looking at residential issues where people are in shacks, if you drive, whether along the N2 or whatever. So for me, when we talk about racism, remember we're talking about a very, very complex topic which triggers off different feelings from different people depending on where you are located. And I don't know where to locate the debate, but I think we don't talk about it enough, and we leave it to extremists, and I see that as dangerous.
Can I ask you, the three of you, let's start with you, Mienke. Do you have the same understanding, the way you describe racism and the institutional arrangements in South Africa that still make the child in Diepsloot, as you say, so vastly different to the child in Sandhurst or Sandton? Are we having the same conversation here, or is other people talking about totally different things? They think racism is just barely being called the K word or something like that.
I think that for some people, I actually agree with Professor Mkhize that definitely some of the views that are put on a very powerful platform such as Twitter, I think we're all learning pretty quickly how powerful such a platform is, whether it's Twitter, Facebook, the internet in general. And if you are angry about something and you tweet it, that doesn't necessarily also represent what everybody is feeling. And I also agree that it maybe does it's actually something that we're saying. That's exactly what I said earlier, was everybody starts talking, oh, the Twitter was terrible, the tweets are awful, but like, what is making people say this? What the reactionary tweets as well, and why are people getting so upset? Why are people getting upset? For example, some people were upset about what President Zuma said in his speech, which then triggered, and it all becomes this whole Twitter war. And we should look at what are the disparities still, and that's what we look at in the Institute, is we look at, well, why does the child in Alex not have the same value of education or the same, quality of education as the child in Sandton or in some Western Cape schools have? And why does service delivery in some areas not work and in others? And that's why people are getting frustrated and starting to take it out on each other. And that's these underlying issues that need to be talked about.
Gillian Schutte, you've analyzed these problems for a long time, and I've followed your work. What now? What should we be doing as South Africans?
Well, I agree that it needs to be a high-level debate, and it needs to be an ongoing conversation, not simply when somebody gets insulted in the ANC. It has to be an ongoing social, must be in the public space.
But that debate happens while there isn't as much movement as many of us would like to see in these arrangements, in how the child in Alex goes to school and the child in Sandton is going to school. So it's just going to be a talk shop, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's another thing. There needs to be a mass movement in terms of looking at issues of poverty and agitating around issues of poverty and for issues of equality. In this system, racism, this kind of system, this neoliberal system perpetuates racism. It worships people, who hold the sort of means of production, and we know that that's largely the white community. So nothing's going to shift. In this system, nothing is going to shift. Racism is entrenched. Whiteness is entrenched, white privilege is entrenched, and that's the way it's going to stay,
That's a criticism of your government, Professor Mkhize, essentially that we are stuck here, we are not going to go out of until a revolution, if you will, happens in the way these arrangements are made in our society.
Not really. I think it's important to acknowledge that we have to devise new strategies and new approaches. Remember, we come from a history where racism was overt. It was said black and white. You wouldn't stand there, you would buy there, and so on. But now, remember, there are also subtle forms of racism. And it gets more complex, because if you grow up and you don't tell people that I'm not going to drink from the same cup with you because you're black, but your mindset or deep down in terms of your consciousness.
Okay, let me stop you. What Gillian Schutte is saying is that essentially what we've done in the past 20 years has been to move the National Party out of the seat, get into the seat as the African National Congress, and just keep going. And you know what? You can say, oh, Justice, you and I can share a cup of tea and drink from the same bottle, but actually nothing's changed, and the ANC is not going to change it.
Well, there are choices that the democratic government has made, informed by the traditions and the history of the African National Congress. For instance, you remember the debates on privatization against nationalization.
I'm going to ask you to be very quick because we've run out of time.
So I don't think it has been a soft approach as we present it, but I would say it has been a cautious approach so as to make sure that we remain together. There were two things: wanting to see the distribution of wealth, but at the same time the promotion of national unity. But I think we're at the point now, there's really a move towards aggressive change of gear, so to say, and you'll see more and more tensions.
Deputy Minister, thanks so much for your time. Mienke Steytler, thanks so much for your time. Gillian Schutte, always a pleasure to have you here. After the break, our winner and loser of the week. Stay with us.